What happens when one of Hollywood's most unpredictable comedy legends sits down with one of daytime television's sharpest voices? A simple question about his career turns into an explosive battle that nobody saw coming. This is the moment, Chevy Chase walked off The View, and what he said before storming out will leave you speechless. Asterisk. The studio audience was buzzing with excitement as Chevy Chase walked onto the set. The veteran comedian, known for his work on Saturday Night Live and films like Caddyshack and National Lampoon's Vacation, settled into his seat at the table. The panel consisted of Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah N., Sunny Hostin, Alyssa Farah Griffin, and of course, Joy Behar. The mood seemed light at first, with Whoopi handling the introductions and the audience applauding warmly. Asterisk. Whoopi started things off with a softball question about his new memoir that had just been released. Chevy smiled and launched into a story about his early days in comedy, talking about the absurdity of his rise to fame. The audience laughed, the hosts nodded along, and everything seemed perfectly pleasant. Sarah asked him about working with some of his famous co-stars, and he delivered a few amusing anecdotes that had everyone smiling. Asterisk. Then Joy leaned forward. So, Chevy, I have to ask, you've had a reputation over the years for being, let's say, difficult to work with. Do you think that reputation is fair? Or is it something the media has blown out of proportion? Asterisk. The audience went quiet. Asterisk. Smile didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. Well, Joy, I think that's an interesting way to start a conversation. Do you often invite people on just to insult them, or is this a special occasion? Asterisk. Joy laughed, but there was an edge to it. I'm not insulting you. I'm asking about something that's been reported by multiple sources over decades. Bill Murray has talked about fighting with you on set. Community creator Don Harmon spoke about issues during your time on that show. These aren't things I'm making up. Asterisk. You're right. You're not making them up, Chevy said, his tone cooling. But you are choosing to focus on them within the first minutes of this interview. I've been in this business for 50 years. I've made people laugh for 50 years. And you want to talk about gossip and rumors from disgruntled people who couldn't take a joke? Asterisk. Whoopi tried to interject. I think what Joy is getting at is that your book touches on some of these relationships, and she's curious about your perspective. Asterisk. My perspective is that comedy is not a safe space, Chevy said, turning to Whoopi, but clearly still heated. When I was on SNL, we pushed boundaries. We said things that made people uncomfortable. That was the entire point. Everyone wants to dissect every interaction through this modern lens of did everyone feel good? Was everyone nice? That way. All hold hands and sing together afterwards. That's not comedy. That's therapy. Asterisk. Joy jumped back in. There's a difference between pushing boundaries in comedy and being unkind to the people you work with. You can be funny without being cruel. Plenty of comedians manage to do it. Asterisk. Oh, really? Chevy leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. And who are these perfect comedians you're referring to? 'Cause I'd love to meet them. Every comedian I know, the good ones anyway. The ones who actually made people laugh until they couldn't breathe. Every single one of them has been called difficult or mean or problematic or whatever the word of the day is. George Carlin was called offensive. Richard Pryor was called dangerous. Joan Rivers was called vicious. But they were geniuses. Asterisk. Joan Rivers is actually a perfect example, Joy said, her voice rising slightly. She was sharp. She was cutting. But the people who worked with her consistently said she was professional and kind behind the scenes. You can be edgy in your work without treating people around you poorly. That's the distinction I'm making. Asterisk. You didn't know Joan? Chevy said flatly. I did. And trust me, she could be just as difficult as anyone else when the situation called for it. The difference is people choose who they want to canonize and who they want to tear down. And right now, I'm apparently in the tear down category. Sonny Hostin spoke up for the first time. Chevy, I don't think anyone is trying to tear you down. But you have to admit that when multiple people over multiple decades say similar things, there might be something worth examining there. That's not gossip. That's a pattern. A pattern, Chevy repeated, shaking his head. Let me tell you about patterns. The pattern I see is that anyone who refuses to apologize for who they are, anyone who doesn't get on their knees and beg forgiveness for not being perfect, gets destroyed. Then I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to sit here and flagellate myself for your entertainment. Nobody's asking you to flagellate yourself, Joy said. We're asking you to take some accountability. Do you think you've ever treated anyone poorly on a set? Simple question. Do you think you've ever treated anyone poorly at this table? Chevy shot back. Because I could probably find some people who'd say yes to that, too. Should we spend the rest of this segment talking about every time you've been sharp with a guest or dismissive of someone's opinion? Or is this standard only applied to me? The audience gasped audibly. Joy's face flushed. That's completely different, and you know it. I'm a talk show host having conversations. You're talking about allegedly creating hostile work environments. Allegedly, Chevy said. That's a fun word. Real courageous of you to bring up allegations. Why don't we talk about the work? Why don't we talk about the fact that Caddyshack is still considered one of the greatest comedies ever made? Why don't we talk about the vacation movies that people still watch with their families every holiday season? Why don't we talk about the fact that I helped build Saturday Night Live into what it became? No, let's talk about whether I was nice enough in rehearsal 40 years ago. Alyssa Farrah Griffin tried to calm things down. I think we can acknowledge both things, right? You've made incredible contributions to comedy, and maybe there were also moments where things could have been handled differently. Both things can be true, but that's not what this is about, is it? Chevy said, looking directly at Joy. This is about you wanting me to grovel. This is about you wanting a moment where Chevy Chase admits he was wrong. He was terrible. He's sorry. He's learned. He's grown. Whatever the script is that everyone expects now, and I'm telling you, that's not happening. Joy leaned forward even more, her voice steady but intense. I don't want you to grovel, Chevy. I want you to be honest. Can you sit there and honestly tell me you have no regrets about how you've treated people throughout your career? The silence that followed felt like it lasted an eternity. Chevy stared at Joy for a long moment. He finally spoke, his voice quiet but cutting. Of course, I have regrets. Everyone has regrets, but my regrets are mine. They're personal, and they're none of your business. What I'm not going to do is perform contrition for you and this audience, like some kind of trained seal, because you've decided that's what I owe you. I don't owe you anything. You're deflecting, Joy said immediately. This is exactly what people talk about when they say you're difficult. You can't just have a straightforward conversation. Everything becomes an attack. Everything becomes defensive. I'm defensive because I'm being attacked, Chevy said, his voice rising. You brought me on this show under the pretense of discussing my book, my career, my life, and comedy. And within minutes, you turned it into an interrogation about my cue. About my cue, live ski. I madeness aways. A pre-cue sag EOT. My cue word. To see my cue. It's fine salve. My relies. Demiteries. My mazev. My relive. My commode. My kawi play mide. By my cause. A call lied. Guy kite be like we said I up I kite I kakate I sacket case I let I guy abide I sat kiss it it's dit kill up dick dip and puppy kit that it's that wait a slick at character. How exactly did you expect me to react? Should I be thanking you? Asterisk Whoopi tried again to redirect. Okay, let's take a breath here. Chevy, your book does talk about some conflicts you've had. Can we focus on what you wrote about SNL and your time there? You've said that period was both the best and worst time of your life. Can you expand on that? Asterisk, I can, but I don't think Joy wants to hear it, Chevy said, still looking at Joy. I think Joy has already made up her mind about who I am based on articles she's read and stories she's heard secondhand. Why would my actual perspective matter at this point? Asterisk, your perspective does matter, Joy insisted. That's why I'm asking these questions. But you're acting like any criticism or any question about your past is some kind of personal vendetta. It's not. It's journalism. It's having a real conversation instead of just lobbing softball questions and pretending everything is wonderful. Asterisk journalism, Chevy laughed bitterly. Is that what we're calling this? Because it feels a lot more like a hit piece disguised as an interview. And you know what the funny thing is? I actually respect you, Joy. I think you're smart. I think you're quick. I think you don't take garbage from anyone. But right now, you're doing exactly what you accuse me of doing. You're being cruel and calling it honesty. Asterisk the audience was completely silent now. The tension in the studio, palpable. Sarah N. looked uncomfortable, glancing between Chevy and Joy like she was watching a car crash in slow motion. Asterisk Joy's expression hardened. I'm not being cruel. I'm being direct. And if you can't handle direct questions about your own history, maybe you shouldn't be promoting a memoir that discusses that history. You can't write about your life and then get upset when people want to talk about what you wrote. Asterisk. I'm not upset about talking about what I wrote, Chevy said through gritted teeth. I'm upset about your tone, your approach, and your clear agenda coming into this. You didn't read my book wanting to understand me? You read it looking for ammunition. There's a difference. Asterisk Sonny jumped in. Chevy, I read your book, and I actually found a lot of it really thoughtful. You talk about your childhood, your struggles, your complicated relationship with your father, but you also gloss over a lot of the professional conflicts pretty quickly. Why do you think that is? Asterisk Chevy turned to Sonny, seeming slightly calmer when addressing her instead of Joy. Because those conflicts are complicated and they involve other people who have their own versions of events. I'm not going to write 3 chapters about an argument I had with someone on set 30 years ago when I barely remembered the details, and they would probably tell the story completely differently. That's not glossing over. That's being responsible. Asterisk. But that's the problem, Joy interjected. You remember enough to know conflicts happened, but not enough to take any responsibility for them. That's convenient. Asterisk, you know what, Joy? Chevy's voice went cold. I've been in this business long enough to know what you're doing. You're trying to get a viral moment. You're trying to get me to lose my temper. So you can clip this and put it online and everyone can talk about how terrible Chevy Chase is. And the sad thing is, I'm probably giving you exactly what you want right now. Asterisk, if that's what you think this is about, you're more paranoid than I thought, Joy said. I'm asking you legitimate questions that any interviewer would ask. Fact that you're this bothered by them says more about you than it does about me. Asterisk, I'm bothered because you're being disrespectful, Chevy said. There's a way to ask hard questions with some dignity and grace. And then there's this. You're not Barbara Walters, Joy. You're not even trying to understand where I'm coming from. You just want to score points. Asterisk, don't tell me what kind of interviewer I am, Joy snapped. I've been doing this for decades, just like you've been doing comedy for decades. And in those decades, I've interviewed hundreds of people, some of whom I've disagreed with strongly. And I've managed to do it without being called disrespectful. Maybe the problem isn't how I'm asking the questions. Maybe it's that you don't like the questions themselves. Alyssa tried to mediate. I think maybe we're all getting a little heated here. Can we just take a step back, Chevy? What do you want people to take away from your book? What's the main message you're hoping readers get? Chevy didn't look at Alyssa. He kept his eyes on Joy. You really think you're the hero in this scenario, don't you? You think you're holding the powerful accountable, or whatever. But what you're actually doing is participating in the same kind of cruelty you claim to be against. You're just doing it with a smile and calling it an interview. That's absurd. Joy said, I've been nothing but professional with you. If you can't handle a tough interview, that's your problem, not mine. Professional, Chevy repeated. You ambushed me on live television with accusations framed as questions, and you're calling that professional. If I did this to you, if I invited you somewhere and then spent the entire time attacking your character based on things other people have said, you'd call me every name in the book. But because you're doing it with a panel around you and an audience watching, somehow it's acceptable. Whoopi raised her hands. Okay, gentlemen, ladies, everyone. I think we need to move on to another topic. Let's talk about your new projects. What are you working on next? Whoopi suggested. But Chevy wasn't done. No, Whoopi. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm not going to just move on like this didn't happen. Joy asked me if I have regrets, and I do. I regret coming on this show today. I regret thinking this would be a genuine conversation, and I regret not walking out the minute this started. The audience gasped again. Joy's eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly. Well, the door's right there if you want to leave. Nobody's forcing you to stay. Is that what you want? Chevy asked. You want me to walk out so you can spend the rest of the show talking about how you were right about me all along? Because that seems like exactly the kind of thing you'd enjoy. I want you to either engage in this conversation honestly or admit that you can't. Joy said, those are your options. What I don't want is this victim routine where you act like you're being persecuted for being asked basic questions about your public history. Victim routine, Chevy said, his jaw clenched. That's rich coming from someone who makes a living complaining about everything and everyone on national television. Do you ever look in the mirror and wonder if maybe, just maybe, you're part of the problem you claim to be fighting against? Excuse me? Joy's voice went up an octave. I am not the one with a reputation for making sets toxic. I am not the one multiple colleagues have spoken out about. Don't you dare try to turn this around on me. I'm not turning anything around, Chevy said. I'm pointing out the hypocrisy of someone who built a career on being acerbic and confrontational, lecturing me about being difficult. You want to talk about toxic? Let's talk about ambush interviews. Let's talk about building entire segments around tearing people down. Let's talk about the culture you've contributed to where nobody can have a human moment or make a mistake without being crucified for it.